Welcome to this episode of Eureka, and we are going to have a really wonderful conversation with Somak Raichaudhuri, who is the director of Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics at Pune, which is an institution under UGC. He has worked on galaxies, stars, supermassive black holes. We are going to have a really interesting conversation, but before that, let's take a very quick look at his brief profile, and then we'll continue the conversation. Keep watching Eureka.
Professor Somak Raichaudhuri has an illustrious scientific career. Presently, he heads the Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics at Pune. Before joining the IUCAA, Professor Raichaudhuri was professor and head of physics at the Presidency University in Kolkata, where he was also the dean of the Faculty of Natural and Mathematical Sciences. After completing his BSc in Physics in 1983 from the Presidency University in Kolkata, Professor Raichaudhuri pursued further studies in physics from Trinity College in Oxford. He then obtained a PhD in astrophysics from the University of Cambridge, United Kingdom in 1990. Professor Raichaudhuri has made outstanding contributions in stellar mass black holes and supermassive black holes. His work also includes gravitational lensing, cosmology, and astrophysics. He is well known for his contributions to superclusters of galaxies, the largest structures that exist in the universe. Professor Somak also played an active role in presenting astronomy to the public, in particular to school students and their teachers. His work has received widespread national and international appreciation.
Thank you for being with us. Let me start with this simple question. I mean, we all know we are in a planet called Earth, which is one of the 8 planets which is going around the Sun. And like Sun, there are millions of stars which forms our galaxy called as Akash Ganga or Milky Way. That's your universe, right?
Well, I mean, that's what people thought till about 100 years ago, but as recently as 100 years ago. But since then, we have now learned that our galaxy is one of few billion galaxies in the universe. The galaxy itself is the basic building block of the universe, like molecules are in matter. And within a galaxy, there are, again, billions of stars, and the Sun is only a very ordinary, very small star out of these billions.
This is very interesting. It's like, for example, you have your house in a street which is part of a village, and like that village, there are many villages which forms a district, and many districts form a state, and then many states form the country, and we thought there was only one country. Today we know that there are hundreds of countries.
So if you, for example, write your address on a postcard, you start by writing the street and then the post office and then the name of the town, the district, and that goes on. But we stop at the country India. We now know that's part of Earth, and it's a solar system, the Sun, and then you go to the Milky Way galaxy. The Milky Way galaxy is part of a local group. We're part of a Virgo supercluster. The Virgo supercluster is part of the universe. So that address goes on.
Oh my God, I mean, it's mind-boggling. If I ask you something like a very silly question, like let's say how many galaxies are there in the universe, or I mean, what do they estimate? What would be your number?
As I said, I mean, we know there are at least about 10 billion galaxies. That's 10 to the power 10, with 10 zeros, and that is only a lower limit. I think there are many more, and we haven't, of course, been able to see all galaxies now.
You can name everybody in the world can say that I can name my name in any galaxy, and still
there'll
galaxies
be more left over after that. Yes,
that's a very interesting thing. What's the kind of work that you did on these galaxies? Galaxies are there; it's fine. I mean, it's a collection of stars. What's the kind of work that you did?
Well, I've been very fundamentally interested in how galaxies are born and how they evolve. We now know, as we look at the galaxies near us and also look at our own galaxy, that there are many galaxies that are very flat like chapatis, and they have spiral structures in them, and about 75% of all galaxies look like that. And they're very young galaxies. They have stars in them. There's a lot of dust and gas that is in between the stars. And then there are these very old galaxies which are nice and round, and they are very red, and they have very old stars in them, and that's about 25%. But we also know that galaxies interact with each other. We'll see galaxies smashing into each other, eating each other up, tearing each other apart, and so there's a lot of action going on in the universe. And we want to know how these galaxies turn into each other, what happens when they interact, what's going to happen to our galaxy. It turns out that we are going to smash into our neighboring galaxy in about 4 billion years. But what is going to happen to our own galaxy? We need to, in order to understand that, we need to understand what has happened in the past to other galaxies. And then we also see that the entire universe, the galaxies are not uniformly distributed. They are distributed in some kind of a spider web-like structure. And what happens is that these galaxies form on parts, the filaments of these webs, and they move along the filament, and then they go into the intersection of these filaments, which we call clusters of galaxies. So our galaxy, for example, is currently on one of these web filaments, and it's falling into a cluster. And what my particular interest is trying to figure out what happens in a galaxy as it travels along all these filaments. And this hasn't been studied before because we did not have the tools to do it. To actually study galaxies in such detail, we need big telescopes. We need telescopes of all kinds. We need X-ray telescopes in the sky. We need radio telescopes, optical telescopes to look at the various components of the galaxies.
Let me take a breath here. I mean, you have been saying very, very interesting stuff, but then something really mind-boggling. Let me just take a relook at this. What we think when we see the sky is an unchanging sky, which is very placid. I mean, it's a serene. I mean, people would say that everything in the world is, ulta pulta, moving, in action. But whereas the sky is kind of a peaceful place. You are saying that's also kind of born and dying. I mean, that's also changing.
Of course, it is changing. There are very violent things happening in the universe. There are stars exploding. There are galaxies colliding. There are stars colliding. As you know, we discovered last year a gravitational wave from two black holes colliding. All that's happening. Now, most of these things happen over time scales of lakhs of crores of years. And our human time scale is only a few years, tens of years, maybe 100 years. So this is why we don't see these dramatic things happening in the sky night after night. We see changes in the sky. It's not that we don't. We see comets coming and going. We see asteroids. We see meteorites, things like that. Those things happen over time scales of a few minutes or hours or days. There are people who are keen astronomers. Even with the naked sky, they can see stars varying in brightness night after night after night. But those are not, and most of the things take very long time scales.
Coming back to the work that you are doing, which is very interesting, it's something like, for example, if you take a highway, many of the, for example, dabas would be along the highways. So you are saying something like there are highways in the universe where galaxies are kind of situated, and then
these highways are made of dark matter. This dark matter itself does not emit light, so up to now we have not been able to see them. But now we can see them because just like if you look at a highway from a distance, you don't see the highway. You see the points of light that are the cars themselves, the lorries and the trucks. That's how we see them now. We see these galaxies which are points of light, and we see them traveling along. We also see them transforming into other galaxies. And just like if you saw a highway from a distance and you sped a film up, you would have seen cars colliding, God forbid, but you see cars colliding, trucks colliding, and transforming into other things. That is what we are seeing now. We are looking at the products of galaxies as they interact, things that they come very close together and not necessarily collide, but they interact with each other and transform each other in profound ways. They exchange stars. It's like somebody jumping from one truck to another.
Okay.
So stars going from one galaxy to another as they come close together, and they go apart again. Then they form small groups and travel together, and they talk to each other in the sense that they interact with each other. They exchange stars and gas and dust, and they fall into these clusters together like they're entering big cities together.
That's a very interesting analogy, and then kind of we are getting a picture of what's the kind of work that you are doing with galaxies. That's very interesting, but we need to take a very short break. We'll take a very short break. Don't go away. Keep watching Eureka. Welcome back to Eureka, and we are having a very interesting conversation with Dr. Somek Raichaudhuri, who is the director of Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics at Pune. I'm told there is a very supermassive black hole at the center of our galaxy. How big it is? What is it?
Well, I mean, all galaxies, all large galaxies have a very massive black hole in the middle. We now know this, and they vary in their mass from about a million, that is 10 lakh times the mass of the sun, to a billion, which is hundreds of crores times the mass of the sun.
Hundreds of crores of mass of sun.
Of the sun.
And the size is kind of...
yeah, and the size is probably the size of the solar system or even smaller.
Okay.
That's it. And so it's very, very, very massive.
Now I have a very small doubt. we are talking about some object which is, let's say, billions of light years away. If I know that I have a pen in my pocket, I can see it. But how did you find that such a black hole exists that far away?
That's a very interesting question, and this is why, for example, till a few years ago, there was a big doubt. Even a giant like Stephen Hawking had a bet with various other astronomers saying that we will never ever been able to prove that there are black holes in there. But you know, I mean, that is our job as astronomers. We cannot go and touch our objects like many physicists or other biologists can do with their subjects. But we rely on various sources of information, and then we have to do very interesting detective work to piece these things together. In the case of the black hole in the middle of our galaxy, for example, we now know not only that it is there, but its mass is 40 lakh times the mass of our sun.
Okay,
And
my
it's
God.
been very precisely measured. And that is because with telescopes, we have been able to see the motion of the stars around this particular black hole. We can't see the black hole, of course. That is the definition of a black hole. It is something that is dark, no light can come out of it. But we're looking at stars that are orbiting around that black hole, and they're orbiting once every 10 years, 11 years, 12 years, just like planets are around our sun. Very fast. Stars, they're going around this black dot that we cannot see. And from the orbits of these stars, which have been now measured for the last 20, 30 years, we can actually measure what is driving them through gravitation.
It's something like, suppose if I have a rope and tie a stone on the edge, and if I give you a small pull, I mean, it will rotate slowly.
rot- and
But
that's how
whereas if I give a
that's
huge
right.
pull, it will rotate
That's
fast.
right, and that's how the Earth goes around the sun, Venus goes around the sun, Mars goes around the sun. And even if we didn't see the sun, we would know how massive the sun is by looking at how fast these things are moving
Very,
around
very
the sun.
interesting.
Same thing happens to our black hole. We can look at how fast those stars are moving. Very impressive. You know, these videos you can see, it's publicly available on the net, of how these stars are moving. Not only that, we can also see how close these stars are going to this unseen point around which it is going, and from that we can see that in order for these stars to go and come back and not collide, they have to be very, 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 very small. So we measure the mass, we also measure the size by knowing that these stars have gone very close and not collided with them. And combining the two, we know that it is a black hole.
That's a very interesting. What's the kind of work that you did on supermassive black holes?
So what we have been doing is, we now know that, of course, the known matter in the universe, the matter that is made up of protons and neutrons like us, is actually a small fraction of the universe, but these are called baryons. And most of the matter in the universe is about 10 lakh degrees hot, and they emit X-rays. Not like our stars or us. We are a few hundred degrees, 1,000 degrees hot. And this is the gas that is in between the galaxies in clusters of galaxies. And this makes up most of the protons and neutrons in the universe. We are trying to figure out how these things get very hot. And it turns out it is because of the effect of supermassive black holes that are in the middle of galaxies. The black holes themselves don't emit light, but what they do is that they cause the stars and the gas around them to move very fast, and they heat it up.
Okay.
So we are trying to quantify how these things work. And to do that, we need to do radio observations, because that looks at how matter around black holes actually come out of the vicinity of the black hole and interact with everything else. And we also have to observe them in X-rays, because the X-rays catch the actual hot gas after they are heated. You have to put them together. Now, we could only do this in the last 10, 15 years. One of the major instruments that has been used for this is the GMRT in India.
Okay.
It's near Pune, built entirely by Indians. It is the greatest, largest radio telescope in the world, and it actually shows what effect these supermassive black holes have uniquely. No other telescope can show it as well as GMRT, and I've been working with it for the last 10 years to show the effects of these supermassive black holes in the middle of galaxies, massive galaxies.
That's a very interesting point. That also brings a very interesting aside, let's say insight. Till now, most of us would be thinking that doing astronomy means taking a telescope, sitting on a night sky on top of your roof, looking through one side and looking at the sky. But I think when you're talking about radio telescopes, you don't sit along with the radio telescope and look at the sky
I mean,
at all, right?
now we are doing, now astronomers, you are absolutely right. I mean, we do quite a lot of work with school children, and once we had a drawing competition in which I asked the school children to draw the picture of a scientist. Most people drew pictures of people sitting with telescopes looking at the sky. But when I look at the astronomers around me, very, very few people have actually looked through a telescope. It's nowadays what we do. Even if you're working with an optical telescope, you sit in front of a computer in a cold room somewhere. In fact, I observe with a telescope in Ladakh, sitting in a small air-conditioned room in Bangalore. So you don't even look through a telescope, you look at a computer.
This also brings us to a very important question, which is like, in the ancient times, perhaps an astronomer had a very easy job. Sit before a telescope, look at a sky, find a new object. But today, I think you have to sift through a huge amount of data, right? I mean, what's the kind of change that you see in the modern way the astronomy and astrophysics?
Completely. What has happened is, astronomy for a long time, before the space era, used to be people looking through telescopes and taking images, taking pictures. There were photographs. Now, with the digital technology coming in, even optical astronomy is producing, gigabytes and terabytes of data per telescope per night. Now, and that is only optical astronomy. The same thing is happening in X-ray astronomy, UV astronomy, infrared astronomy, radio astronomy. I mean, if I go to a radio telescope and come back after 8 hours of observation, I come back with 50 gigabytes of data.
My God.
Now, this I cannot imagine. When I started doing my work as a student, my tapes held a few megabytes of data. Those floppy disks held a few kilobytes of data. So the data explosion has also meant that we need ways of dealing with data. No longer can an individual astronomer sit in front of two photographs, look at the difference and make discoveries.
Okay.
That is not possible. One needs to generate automated ways of looking at things. Also, when we're looking at variations of things, things vary. And you can't sit and look at things varying and try and figure out what's happening. Automated algorithms have to do it. And this is another thing that I'm very, very interested in, is to find automated ways where people are not involved, but people's experiences are involved. And so this is where machine learning comes in. In general machine learning, what people do is we take our experiences and train a machine to do things, classify things, look for certain things amongst data, and then a computer algorithm then goes and looks for such things amongst these amazing amounts of data that people can't do. So here we are coming close to these data science techniques, big data techniques that are used in many other subjects. In fact, I use the same techniques in finding various kinds of objects in astronomy that a brain scientist uses in EEGs to find and abnormalities in people's brains, and also in heartbeats in ECGs. And we actually work together. I've written papers with computer scientists and biologists where we've looked at how the same technique can be used in finding diseases in the brain and the effects of black holes in quasar spectra. And they all come together.
Very, very interesting. It's a very, very interesting point. Many of us would have this doubt. Why we should do this? Of course, as human being, we always have a quest to know where we are, and hence, as a human being, we should continue to do this. But then this also has spin-off. Like he says, while working this, we are also generating new ways of, let's say, curing our diseases, understanding our brain, and so many other things. We'll take a very short break. After the break, we are going to have a very interesting discussion about, is institution offering its facilities to the students and the college community in India? Take a quick break, come back again, we'll continue with Eureka. Welcome back to Eureka, and we are having a very wonderful conversation with Dr. Soumik Raichaudhuri, who is the director of Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics. And this is a time, I think perhaps there is an explosion of astronomy and astrophysics in India. We have a number of new telescopes, and we are getting into a number of very interesting projects. Can you tell us some of the very interesting projects that India is getting into?
Yes,
Big projects, international projects?
Well, in India, astronomy has always been a very, very important subject, but traditionally India has kept to itself. There are very important groups who've worked amongst themselves or with each other within India. But only recently India has got involved in some really global projects in a way that has never happened before. This is partly because the government is very interested in expanding the scientific and academic sector, and it's partly also because such things are happening in the world. No single country can go and fund these projects anymore. They're asking the world to come together. Particle physicists have done this for a long time, like CERN, for example. There's been one facility. But things like that are happening in India. For example, as you know, India will build the third LIGO detector after the gravitational waves were discovered last year. And there are two in the US, and we are collaborating with the LIGO detectors themselves to build the third one in India. It's going to start very soon and will take us 10 years to build this in India. So that is one. And this, of course, will create a huge amount of opportunity for Indian students and scientists to not just build this facility but use it. Then we are getting involved in global projects. For example, India has now signed up for 10% of the 30-meter telescope, which was supposed to be built in Hawaii, but it looks like now it might be built somewhere else, maybe in La Palma. And this will be one of the biggest telescopes, again, to be built in about 10 years' time. And there we are collaborating with China, Japan, Canada, and the US to build this telescope. All the money that the Indian government is spending on this will be spent in India, so parts of this big telescope will be built in India. It's already started. We're building some of the mirrors, we're polishing the mirrors, we're building the support system, and it's being done in Indian universities, laboratories, and companies. Now, apart from this, we are getting involved, of course, as you know, in space-based astronomy. India has just launched its first big multi-platform space telescope called AstroSat, built entirely in India, almost entirely in India. And now the data are coming in. At this conference that we are now in Jaipur, we are discussing the first results coming back from AstroSat, and they're absolutely stunning. And right now, all the data is only for the use of Indians.
Okay.
It will open up to the world from next year, where anybody in the world can use it. So again, it's a big opportunity for Indians. Then we are coming to big global projects like the Square Kilometre Array, which will be the biggest large telescope, radio telescope, to be built in Australia and South Africa. Again, Indians are taking lead. NCRA, which is part of the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, is taking a lead, and there's a consortium of about 20 universities and institutes all over India that are also along with it for the SKA. And similarly, there are all these other things opening up. For example, the South African Large Telescope, we are 7% partners. IUCA is, and that is currently the largest telescope in the world. Anybody in any university can actually use this telescope through IUCA being a partner of the SALT. So we are not only looking at building things within India, we are going global right now.
Very, very interesting thing. Let me now come to this part that you said that anybody in Indian university system can use this world's largest telescope. And your center itself is named as Inter-University Center for Astronomy and Astrophysics.
So
How do you place yourself, and
So
how
what
do
happened
you
is in
kind
the-
of collaborate with
That's
the
right.
Indian universities?
In the 1980s, the UGC, the University Grants Commission, felt that there are some of these new subjects coming up which are very expensive. And if all the universities individually want to do research in these subjects, particularly in physics, these are subjects like nuclear physics, particle physics, and astrophysics, then it would be very expensive for universities to do it themselves. So they built these inter-university centers, and there are 3 inter-university centers. We are one of them, and we are the one in astronomy and astrophysics built in Pune. And our job is to have facilities in astronomical teaching as well as research for anybody who works at any university or college in India, whether they teach or are a student. And from 1988, we've been supporting astronomy research and teaching in India. Now many universities all over India teach astronomy as part of their BSc and MSc courses, but we now have, for example, 150 associates who spend periods of 2 weeks to 2 months, 3 months, a year in IUCA. They come and go, and they bring their students together. They interact with other associates, they interact with us, and also they interact with the international community. We have a lot of international visitors who come to our center, and as a result, last year, for example, 200 papers were published by people from Indian universities in international journals on astronomy, starting from zero in almost zero in the 1980s, 30 years ago. So this is expanding, and we need this to further expand, because as I said, we are getting into all these big projects. We need Indian scientists to make use of them. For example, AstroSat. It is sending back so much data from the 5 telescopes that are on AstroSat. Very soon, when it opens up to the world, people from other countries are going to use it if we don't use it ourselves. And that is why we are concentrating on creating this manpower within India that is trained to use specific things like X-ray telescopes on AstroSat, like the optical telescopes and their advanced instrumentation. We are also building these big telescopes within India. There's a 3.6 meter telescope in Nainital, Devasthal, which has just been inaugurated last year. And these telescopes are there to train people to use big telescopes before they go on to use the 30-meter telescope 10 years from now. They need to be trained on smaller and smaller telescopes. And this is now open to anywhere. Anybody in a physics or mathematics department in the country can say, okay, I'm going to learn how to do astronomy. They can not only use telescopes, but they can use their physics and mathematics and engineering knowledge to do other aspects of astronomy. We need engineers to build these telescopes and design various things to build instruments. We need mathematicians and chemists and physicists to model objects that we observe through these telescopes. There are people even in biological fields who are getting into astronomy to study the biological implications of the data we are getting from planets around other stars. So a lot of, and it's a multidisciplinary field.
Very, I mean, it's a very big gamut, and kind of we are running out of the time. But then I want to ask you one important question, which is, as human being, we have the eternal quest. Who are we? Where are we? How have we come about? And maybe astronomy and working on astrophysics and cosmology gives a part answer to this quest, which is time immemorial. But other than this, do you really see any practical use for doing astronomy and astrophysics?
There are many uses, of course. Of course, it is very important for us to know where we are and what's going to happen to us, what's going to happen to our planet, where we come from. But in order to do this, we have to create technology. And all the technology that we create pushes the frontiers of technology, because we are looking at things that are very far away. You might not know this, but the phone that you have in your pocket, most of that has come from astronomy research, because the phone technology depends on radio technology that came from radar and radio astronomy. The camera in the phone that everybody uses came from digital technology that was used to put a camera on the Hubble Space Telescope so that can send digital images back to us, right? And so all of the things have a very good use after we've used it for astronomy. Infrared technology used for infrared telescopes are now used for night vision cameras used in defense. The gravitational wave detectors that we are making actually measure very tiny displacements that is used in detection of earthquakes, detection and finding minerals under the soil. All that technology that is being used for these very precise measurements are very soon being spun off into industry. There's a lot of industry that comes out of this. I think it is necessary to push the frontiers of technology for whatever reason.
Very important point. It shows that the basic sciences, the research in basic sciences is the foundation on which the technological research can build up later. That's a very important point, and then with this point we may have to end this conversation here. For lack of time, we could have discussed quite a lot of very interesting stuff, but then the time is constrained. We'll stop this conversation here with him, but then we'll continue with a conversation with another scientist in the next week, the same time. Keep watching Eureka. Thank you.